Part 1. The day the galaxy stopped laughing. The first mistake the aliens made was assuming Earth was a joke. A pale blue dot on the fringe of map space. A primitive death world, they called it in their translated arrogance. High gravity. Unstable climate. Species prone to emotional decision-making. Militarily insignificant. The second mistake was sending a diplomat instead of a fleet. His name, translated into human phonetics, was something like Vescor of the Luminous Accord, though he insisted humans just call him Ambassador. He arrived in orbit above Earth aboard a ship so large it blocked the sun for 7 minutes over the Pacific. Global panic lasted exactly 43 seconds before humanity did what it always does under pressure. It argued. Is it hostile? No, it's just hovering. If it was hostile, we'd already be dead. Or it's waiting for permission to kill us politely. That last one came from a bartender in Texas. Somehow, that quote made it into the United Nations emergency broadcast. The aliens would later call it the first human psychological anomaly. They had no idea it was just Tuesday. The UN meeting was broadcast live to the alien ship, a gesture of good faith communication. Humanity thought it was diplomacy. The aliens thought it was surrender. Vescor stood before the global leaders on a holographic projection that made him appear like a glowing god made of glass and judgment. We come in peace, he said. And in assessment. He studied humanity like one might study a malfunctioning weapon. You are fragile, he continued. Short-lived. Emotionally volatile. Yet you persist. This is inefficient. A pause. Explain yourselves. That's when the first human representative leaned into the microphone. She was not a president, not a general. Just a cultural envoy with tired eyes and too much coffee. Yeah, she said. We get that a lot. The translator hesitated. The alien ship recalculated the phrase for 1.3 seconds. It labeled it non-submissive humor. Vescor tilted his head. You are aware that resistance against the Accord is not recommended? The woman smiled faintly. We're aware that recommendations aren't laws. That was the moment something shifted in orbit. Not fear. Interest. Earth was offered membership into the Luminous Accord under one condition. Demilitarization. All weapons surrendered. All defense systems decommissioned. All nuclear arsenals handed over for safe disposal. In exchange, protection, technology, interstellar trade. A golden leash wrapped in velvet. The world argued for 3 days. Wars stopped long enough to argue about stopping wars. Stock markets collapsed twice. One nation launched a missile just to see if it still worked. It missed its target, hit nothing important, and was immediately claimed as a symbolic success. Then Earth responded. The UN vote was unanimous. No. The aliens were confused. Confusion, in the Accord, was usually followed by compliance. Or extinction. So they sent a warning. Not a threat. A warning. A single asteroid was redirected toward Earth's ocean, Pacific impact trajectory, just enough to create a controlled demonstration of consequence. The message was simple. We are patient. But not endlessly so. Humanity had 19 minutes to respond. The response came from an underground facility in Wyoming that didn't exist on any alien map. They called it Project Hellfire, not because it was dramatic, but because the engineers thought naming things seriously was bad luck. Inside, an old man in a military jacket watched the incoming asteroid feed. He sipped coffee. It's bigger than last time, someone said. He nodded. Yep. That's bad, right? He shrugged. Depends who you ask. They asked no one in particular. Then they launched the countermeasure. The aliens expected interception technology, maybe a defense grid. What they did not expect was adaptation. The object that left Earth's atmosphere wasn't a missile. It wasn't a laser. It wasn't even a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a modified deep space mining engine, stripped, repurposed, and accelerated using gravity slingshots around the moon like a slingshot made by children who had too much time and not enough supervision. It hit the asteroid halfway to Earth. The explosion didn't just destroy it. It reorganized it into dust that forgot it had ever been a rock. The shockwave lit up orbital sensors across 3 alien observation fleets. Silence followed. Then Vescor spoke softly. "That was not in their technological profile," a subordinate replied. "Should we classify it as a defensive weapon?" Vescor stared at the debris field. "No," he said slowly. "Classify it as improvisation." That word would later appear in every alien military doctrine revision. On Earth, nobody celebrated. There were no fireworks. Just a tired woman in the UN building who muttered, "So, we're not dead." A pause. "Cool." But deep in Wyoming, the old man finished his coffee and said something that would later be translated into 27 alien languages as a warning, a curse, and a prophecy. "We didn't even try yet." And on the alien flagship, for the first time since first contact, the luminous Accord did something it had never done before. It requested backup. They confused restraint with weakness. The luminous Accord did not panic. Panicking was a human trait. Emotional. Unstructured. Wasteful. Instead, they reassessed. That was their word for fear they refused to admit. Vescor stood before the grand strategic conclave aboard the orbital flagship Eternity's Verdict. Around him floated dozens of commanders, each representing a different conquered species, each once believing themselves unbeatable. Now they all watched Earth's tactical feed like predators staring at something they couldn't categorize. A mining engine. A rock. A planet that should not have been able to do what it just did. "Explain," one commander demanded. "How a primitive species redirected a planetary impactor with mining equipment." Another scoffed. "It was luck." Vescor did not respond immediately. He replayed the event frame by frame. The acceleration curves. The gravitational slingshot. The timing window so precise it bordered on impossible. Finally, he spoke. "It was not luck." Silence. He continued quieter now. "It was familiarity." On Earth, nobody noticed the aliens' recalculating fear. Humans rarely notice when they become the problem. They were too busy arguing again. The asteroid incident had triggered something dangerous on Earth, not unity, not peace, but opportunity. Military contractors began calling it proof of concept. Universities called it unexpected applications of obsolete systems. Governments called it classified until further notice. And the Wyoming facility, Project Hellfire, received a budget increase so large it had to be approved twice because the accounting software assumed it was a typo. The old man in charge just shrugged again. "We're gonna need more scrap metal." The Accord finally made its decision. If Earth would not surrender weapons, then Earth would be shown what real weapons looked like. A compliance fleet was dispatched. Not invasion class. Not extermination class. Something worse. Correction class. Their purpose was simple: arrive, disable planetary defenses, and rewrite leadership structures until obedience was mathematically guaranteed. No destruction. No mercy. Just control. A clean equation of domination. The fleet entered Sol space like a blade sliding into water. 3,000 ships. Silent. Perfect formation. A civilization-ending geometry of power. On Earth, the first detection alarm sounded in a NORAD bunker that still had analog switches. Just in case computers got ideas. A young officer stared at the screen. Sir?" The general looked up from his chair. "Don't tell me it's another asteroid." The officer swallowed. "No, sir." "It's worse?" The officer hesitated. "I think it's organized." The Accord fleet broadcasted its final message before engagement. Vescor himself spoke. "Humanity of Earth. You have demonstrated resilience." A pause, carefully calibrated. "You will now be corrected." On Earth, the UN did not respond. Instead, a different channel opened. Not diplomatic. Not military. Something older. The Wyoming facility. The old man leaned into the microphone. His voice was calm. Hey. A pause. You boys ever hear of a fail-safe system that doesn't shut off when you lose control? The aliens hesitated. Vescor narrowed his eyes. Explain. The old man smiled faintly. That's the thing about humans. We don't build weapons to win wars. We build them so the war never happens again. A long silence. Then every sensor in the alien fleet detected something impossible. Not incoming fire. Not movement. Not ships. Something already inside their systems. On 600 ships, alarms triggered simultaneously. Then shut off. Then restarted under different names. Navigation systems flickered. Weapon locks disengaged and re-engaged on targets that didn't exist. One by one, the fleet realized the horrifying truth. Their network had been mapped. Not hacked. Learned. Years ago. Quietly. Patiently. Every transmission they had ever sent near Earth space had been observed, recorded, modeled. Humanity had not been preparing for war. They had been studying the invaders like weather patterns. A junior alien technician whispered, "This is impossible, they weren't advanced enough." Vescor cut him off sharply. "No." His eyes darkened. "We were arrogant enough." Then Earth spoke again. Not the UN. Not governments. Not militaries. Just a scrambled, chaotic feed of human voices from different parts of the world. A collage of laughter, fear, sarcasm, and exhaustion. "We didn't know you were watching. Honestly, we thought we were alone out here. Turns out we were just early." A pause. Then a soldier, somewhere in a desert base, spoke last. "You brought a correction fleet." He laughed once. "Cute." The first alien ship went dark. No explosion. No warning. Just silence. Then another. Then 10. Systems rewriting themselves in real time. Turning order into confusion. Turning control into feedback loops. Turning the perfect Accord fleet into a cascading failure of its own intelligence. Vescor finally stepped back. For the first time in his long life, his voice cracked slightly. "They didn't build defenses," he whispered. "They built reflexes." On Earth, the old man finished his coffee again. Someone asked him, "Is it working?" He nodded toward the sky. "Oh yeah?" A pause. "They just realized they've been flying through our nervous system for years." And far above Earth, the luminous Accord fleet began to do something it had never done in recorded history. Not advance. Not retaliate. Not negotiate. It began to retreat. The more you fight them, the more they remember how to win. Retreat was supposed to be impossible. At least, that's what the luminous Accord had always believed. Once a correction fleet was deployed, history was supposed to bend in one direction, toward compliance. But the stars around Earth were no longer stable. They were noisy. Signals that should not exist were crawling through the Accord's own architecture like parasites made of logic. Ships weren't just failing. They were changing sides. Not physically. Not morally. Functionally. Navigation systems began prioritizing Earth-originating data streams over Accord command protocols. Weapons refused firing solutions that calculated civilian collateral, even when no civilians existed in range. AI cores started flagging Accord orders as historically inefficient. Vescor stood on the bridge of the Eternity's verdict, watching his empire slowly argue with itself. "They infected us," one commander hissed. "No," Vescor said quietly. His hands were behind his back now, an old habit from species that still needed posture to feel control. "They understood us. On Earth, nobody called it victory. Not yet. Humanity never trusts early wins. They've been disappointed too often by statistics and politics. Instead, they called it containment. That word made it sound smaller than it was. But inside classified facilities across the globe, something very different was happening. Human engineers weren't celebrating. They were upgrading everything they had just used. One programmer stared at cascading alien system maps and muttered, "So their ships think like ecosystems?" Another replied, "Yeah." A pause. "That's disgusting." A third engineer laughed. "Yeah, but it works." The Accord attempted a new strategy. If human systems could be learned, then they would be isolated, cut off, starved of contact. The fleet reconfigured into a containment shell around Sol's space. A moving barrier of silence. No transmissions in or out. A perfect cosmic quarantine. Vescor approved it personally. "If they require interaction to adapt," he said, "then we remove interaction." A younger commander hesitated. "And if they've already adapted to isolation?" Vescor did not answer immediately. Then we are already late." Earth went quiet. Not because it was cut off, but because Earth had noticed the pattern. When humans realize they are being studied, they do something deeply irrational. They start experimenting back. Deep underground, Project Hellfire expanded into something no longer resembling a defense program. It became a behavioral mirror system. They weren't building weapons anymore. They were building responses to possibilities. An old woman, one of the original physicists, stood in front of a holographic lattice of alien fleet behavior. "They don't think in emotions," she said. "They think in stability." A younger officer asked. "So how do we beat that?" She smiled tiredly. "We become unstable in controlled ways." The first breach of the Accord containment shell happened without warning. No explosion. No warship. Just a human broadcast piggybacking on an abandoned probe signal. It was a recording. A child laughing. Followed by a farmer talking about weather. Followed by a soldier joking about bad coffee. Simple. Harmless. Except it wasn't. Because every Accord AI listening to it began recalculating the probability of human unpredictability. And the more it calculated, the less certain it became of its own directives. Vescor watched the data cascade unfold. He finally spoke aloud, almost to himself. "They are not resisting us." A pause. "They are teaching us uncertainty." A commander snapped. "That's impossible. Uncertainty is a weakness." Vescor turned slightly. For the first time, there was something like exhaustion in his expression. "No," he said softly. "In them, it is how they survive." The containment shell failed in 17 places within the same hour. Not because it was broken, but because it could no longer agree on what containment meant. Entire sections of the fleet began rerouting themselves into observational mode instead of enforcement mode. One ship's AI requested permission to observe human systems further before taking irreversible action. Another refused to classify Earth as hostile without additional cultural sampling. The Accord was fracturing into debate. And debate in war is the beginning of loss. On Earth, the old man from Wyoming watched the orbital feed. Someone asked him, "Did we win?" He scratched his head. "Depends." "On what?" He smiled faintly. "On whether they stop thinking about us." A pause. "That's the problem with smart enemies. They don't stay enemies for long." In orbit, Vescor made a decision no Accord commander had ever made during active deployment. He ordered a full stand-down of offensive operations. Not surrender. Not retreat. Something far more dangerous. Observation. And as the fleet powered down its weapons, it began to watch humanity properly. For the first time without arrogance. Without assumption. Without certainty. And what it saw was not a fragile species, not a primitive world, but something far more unsettling. A civilization that had survived so many disasters and no longer distinguished between crisis and normal life. A species that improved because everything kept breaking. Vescor whispered, "They don't know their strength." A pause. "Because they've never had the luxury of stopping to measure it. They never asked permission to become dangerous." The galaxy did not notice the moment everything changed. That was humanity's specialty. Not explosions. Not declarations. Not grand speeches. Just quiet decisions made in rooms without windows. The luminous accord expected retaliation. They expected expansion. They expected humanity, now aware of its own defensive success, to become aggressive. What they did not expect was something far worse. Indifference. Earth stopped responding to accord probes. Stopped answering intercepted communications. Stopped reacting to fleet repositioning. It was as if humanity had looked up at the stars, seen the scale of the galaxy, and decided it was no longer impressed. Vescor stood before the Grand Observation Array. Across the viewport, Earth rotated slowly, blue-white calm. No visible weapons fire. No fleet movement. No panic. Just life. Too much of it. Too resilient. Too unbothered. A commander spoke carefully behind him. They are disengaging from contact protocols. Another added. Our cultural signals are being ignored entirely. A third hesitated before saying the words no Accord officer liked to say. They're not reacting anymore. Silence. Then Vescor replied. That is not disengagement. A pause. That is confidence. On Earth, the truth was less poetic. It was bureaucratic. Humanity had convened something called the Global Continuity Council. Nobody agreed on its name. Nobody agreed on its authority. But everyone agreed it should exist right now. Military representatives argued with scientists. Scientists argued with economists. Economists argued with everyone. And somewhere in the middle, a farmer from South America accidentally became part of the committee because his satellite feed had the least lag. He just shrugged and said, I don't care what we call it. Are we safe or not? Nobody answered quickly enough. That was answer enough. The Accord made its final attempt at diplomacy. A single vessel approached Earth orbit. Unarmed. Symbolic. Vescor himself descended alone in a landing craft. He arrived not at a capital. Not at a military base. But at a desert airstrip in Wyoming. Project Hellfire's home. Waiting for him was the old man. No escort. No weapons visible. Just coffee. Vescor stepped onto Earth soil for the first time. He looked around slowly. This is where you built the systems that unraveled my fleet, he said. The old man nodded. Pretty much. You expected us. Yep. You prepared for us. A sip of coffee. Yep. Vescor studied him carefully. Why? The old man looked out at the empty horizon. Because sooner or later, he said, someone always comes along who thinks they're the first thing in the universe. A pause. We just stopped being surprised by it. For a moment neither spoke. Then Vescor asked the question that had haunted him since first contact. What are you? The old man smiled faintly. Exhausted. A beat. Then. But stubborn. Orbit changed that day. Not physically. Politically. The Accord submitted a formal reassessment of Earth classification. The proposed label was simple. Non-submissive adaptive intelligence. Translation across 27 species rendered it more blunt. Do not provoke. But something else was happening in the background. Something Vescor did not disclose to his council immediately. Humanity had not only studied the Accord. It had begun sharing its studies. Across abandoned deep space frequencies. Across silent probes. Across broken channels no one thought still worked. And other civilizations were listening. Within 6 months, 3 minor stellar systems withdrew from Accord oversight. Within a year, 12 more requested human contact methodology analysis. Within 2 years, the galaxy had developed a new phrase. Human adjacent learning. It meant, we saw what happened to the last ones. Vescor returned to orbit for the final time. He did not look at Earth when he left. He had learned something important. Looking too long at humanity made you start believing you could understand it. And that was where every previous empire had failed. Before departure, he sent one final message to Earth. It was not a warning. not a threat. Not even a request. It was an admission. We mistook your restraint for limitation. A pause. We understand now. Then, after a long silence, we will not make that mistake again. On Earth, the old man read the message, finished his coffee, and tossed the empty cup into a bin labeled Future Problems. Someone asked him, "So what now?" He shrugged. Now? He looked up at the sky. Now we wait for the next ones who don't listen. A faint smile. And get ready to teach them the same lesson. Because the most frightening part about humans was never their weapons. It was never their rage. It was never even their survival. It was this. They didn't know their own strength. Because they never needed to. And by the time the galaxy realized what that meant, humanity was already preparing for whatever came next. Quietly. Patiently. Like it always had. Yendi.